How can you quickly render and composite a 3D model into a photograph with not much work and match the perspective? You can do that in Adobe Substance 3D Stager, and it allows you to bring in a photograph and add 3D models and materials, and then make renderings with shadows and HDRIs. When you open up Adobe Substance 3D Stager, you can change the scene units to meters, although every model you bring in will be scaled at centimeters. Just keep that in mind. Select the environment option at the top and you'll see match image. This allows you to import a photograph to use as your backdrop. Adobe Substance 3D Stager will then match the perspective and change the camera output size to your choice, as well as detect light sources. You can also choose to have the image size be the camera aspect ratio if you want a larger render or a specific aspect ratio. I'm going to choose the image size in this case and have it detect the light sources as well as match the camera perspective. Now Adobe Substance 3D Stager will calculate all of those options. I happen to know that the focal length of this camera was not 50 millimeters, so if you do have that information, you can change the focal length. It was approximately 24. So I'll manually enter 24 millimeters. Remember, that would be a 35 millimeter equivalent if you're looking at the EXIF data of your photograph. Now I can import a 3D model that I can place in this scene to do a mock-up render. File, Import, 3D Model. If your models are scaled in real-world units, remember they're going to come in as centimeters. Here I have my model, and if I click Transform, it says 3.4 meters in all of these directions. That's because the scene units is meters. This model is actually 341 centimeters. So make sure when you're exporting something like OBJs or STLs that don't have inherent units that you pay attention to that. I can simply dolly out the camera to be able to see the object. And then I can pan the camera and have it placed where I want it to be. Double check to make sure your camera match is correct. Often it will change when you have an object in the scene. As you can see here, it's a little strange the way the angle of this object is. You can quickly just recalculate the camera. But before I do that, I'm going to duplicate this object. And that way I can have a few other ones in the scene so it appears that there's a little bit more depth and perspective. And as you can see here, the camera angles are off. So I'm going to go ahead and select Environment and then Match Image. Substance 3D Stager seems to have a better chance at getting everything right after it says, oh, there's some objects in the scene. So now I know where everything needs to be. And as you can see, if these are really 3.4 meters tall, they're going to be pretty big. And so now the camera is where it needs to be. For the most part, I think the camera is pretty accurate, but if I look at these objects here, so this first one, this big one right here, I'm going to turn it off. You can see this shadow right here. I think it looks all right on these ones in the back, although I think this light is a little bit bright. We need to make sure that the shadows match this. So I'll bring this one back, and then if I click on Environment, I can see the lights in the environment. In this particular case, it's outdoors, so there's sunlight. Yes, there's some reflected light off of different things, but it's only going to be one light source. And Substance 3D Stager has determined that there are two lights. That's just not true because we're outside. So I'm going to delete one of these lights. It doesn't matter which one, just delete one. Now I have the single light, but it's not exactly at the right angle. So I'm going to change the rotation of this light. Make sure you select this light, and then I can change its rotation so it matches a bit more with the shadows that are on the trees back there. That's about too much. Probably something around here. It's pretty raking straight across the frame. And once again, I'm going to remember the angle of this right here, and then I can see the object behind. So if I look at the way those trees are looking, and then I look at this one, that's a pretty good matching angle. So I would say that's pretty accurate, except if you look at the trees, it comes out pretty far, about the length of that tree. So that helps you determine the angle of the sun in the sky. So I would say that the sun is just a little bit lower. So once again, if I go back to environment, I can select this environment, select this light, and then I can change the height. So I can just bring it down a little bit and approximately like this. So not much change, but I think this is a little bit more accurate based on the trees. Now I can place this object where I think it needs to be. Maybe rotate it a little bit. Now I can apply some materials to this. Select the material icon right here. It's a little circle ball. And then we can go ahead and select some materials. Perhaps I'll select some different paint colors. Here we have some different paints. And I'm going to pick this brushed paint for this big one here. And I'll select this one in the back. And I'll pick this blue paint. Of course, I can change the colors in the material properties. And then for this one over here, I'm going to pick the light gray paint just to see the different effects of those paints. And I can change the color. So if I select this material, we can see the paint color, select the paint color, and I can pick maybe a bright green. Actually, I think it will look a little bit better if it's garish purple here, and then make it a little bit more pastel-y. Then this pink one, I'll also change the color. Select the paint color here, and we'll just add a little bit of more saturation to that, and then maybe bring it more into the purple realm. So now we have some nice purple, bluish, pink marshmallow teeth things that are going to be installed out in the landscape. And you can add more of these objects in the background just to give it a sense of scale. In fact, I think I'm going to move this one back a little bit. Now we can definitely see these are taking over the land, and there's going to be so many of them blocking what's in front here. One thing we should pay attention to is the scale of this texture. You can see it has some roughness on it, and we can repeat that UV. So if I type 10 here, it's going to make all of that a little bit more fine. And for the size of these objects, I think that's going to be probably pretty accurate. I'm going to click this one too. I'm going to repeat it 10 times. It's usually best to attempt factors of 10, powers of 10, so different orders of magnitude. Maybe this first one, see what it looks like if I do 100. Yeah, I think that's just a bit smoother. It's going to be 3 meters tall, so that's a lot of surface to cover with a brush. You're not going to notice the brush marks that much. Now I'm ready to render, so I can click the Render tab. In the Render tab, make sure you select a high enough render. When you're first seeing if you like what you see, you can do draft, but eventually pick a full high render. And you can render a PNG, but what's even better is to render a Photoshop file. Then you can go into Photoshop and post-process each part of the render and select different objects. This gives you a lot more flexibility with the post-processing of your render. As I see this render screen here, I want to fix this object right here. You can see how it's kind of on this bush. You want to pay attention to that. So I'm going to select this one in the design space and then move it a little bit. Since this isn't an actual 3D environment, we have to be careful about where we place things because they could be unbelievable. Even this one here is kind of hanging off the road a little bit, so I think I'll move it over this way so it's just a little bit more in a believable spot. So now this one isn't covering up that bush. So just pay attention to what you see there. And although it's not a 3-dimensional space, Substance 3D Stagier does its best to kind of understand that this is a ditch and that the ground is changing a little bit. If there was a harsh wall here, it would just dump the shadow on top of it. So again, it's not a 3D environment, but we do have a little bit of leeway and believability built by Substance 3D Stagier. Now that I have a little bit more pleasing composition, I'm going to go ahead and render this out. Hopefully you can create realistic renders and composites with Adobe Substance 3D Stagier. Happy 3D modeling.